Hi, boys and girls. For the last lesson in chapter 13, we're going to focus on a couple of vocabulary words and really putting all of our properties together about our four-sided shapes. And we have been working in this chapter with triangles and with quadrilaterals. And a quadrilateral is any four-sided shape. So if we think about a square, for example, that's a four-sided shape. The four-sided shapes we've been working with in this chapter are parallelograms and rhombuses and trapezoids. And in fact, I've named them all here. Rectangles are a special type of parallelogram, and squares are a special type of rhombus. Squares are also special rectangles. Squares are super special shapes. So here I've drawn out the 5 different shapes we've talked about in this chapter. So if we go ahead and drag and drop these names all over the place, we have our trapezoid up here. We can see it has one set of parallel lines. Okay. Over here we have our rectangle, 2 sets of parallel lines, one set longer than the other. Over here we have our square, 2 sets of parallel lines, all 90-degree angles, and all sides are equal. Up here we have our parallelogram, 2 opposite sides are parallel. And over here, rhombus, 2 opposite sides parallel, but with all 4 sides having equal length. So let's go through these properties that I've listed out down here. And I'm going to start with this property down here. The angles are always right angles. That's true only for a square and only for a rectangle. Gee, I wish that looked a little bit nicer. So square and rectangle, the angles are always right angles. Let's go through this list from top to bottom. The opposite angles are congruent. Well, we know that opposite angles are congruent in a rhombus, so that's true for here. Opposite angles are congruent in a parallelogram, and it's true in a square and a rectangle as well. If all of the angles are always right angles, the opposite angles have to be congruent. All 4 sides have equal length. Well, that's true in only 2 of our shapes. And that's going to be true in the rhombus. All 4 of these sides are congruent. And in a square, all 4 sides are going to have equal length. And I'm going to just cut off the word all there. So neighboring angles add up to 180 degrees. Well, that's going to be in the rhombus. That's going to be in the parallelogram. That's going to be in the square. And that's going to be in the rectangle. 2 pairs of opposite sides that are congruent. And that's true for the parallelogram. That's true. Let's see if we can move this guy over here for now. That's true for our rectangle. I'm going to hide that in there. That's true for our square. Okay, 2 pairs of opposite sides. And 2 pairs of opposite sides in our rhombus as well. And then finally, neighboring angles only add up to 180 when between parallel lines. That's only true in the trapezoid. And I'm going to very quickly get rid of these properties here. So just give me a second so we can clean this up. So we're going to just move, we're going to move all these things down so that we can clearly see everything on the same screen without things really being in the way. We're going to get rid of that. And just bear with me for 1 second because I want to go through all of our properties again with us. And we have one up here that I missed because there was so much stuff going on the screen here. So the rhombus is a quadrilateral. The square is a quadrilateral. The trapezoid is a quadrilateral. The parallelogram is a quadrilateral. And the rectangle is a quadrilateral. So all of these shapes are quadrilaterals. And we're going to send this guy away down here. So if all of our shapes are quadrilaterals, we now see that these shapes have all these different properties, right? Angles that add up to 180, okay? I'm sorry, neighboring angles that add up to 180. Four sides that have equal length. So you can feel free to pause this video on this particular slide to help you remember these properties as you complete today's assignment. Let's go through and talk about special cases of these shapes now. So some shape is a special rhombus. And we talked before how a square is a special rhombus. Well, a square is also a special rectangle. So a rhombus is defined as having all four sides are congruent. Well, a square has all four sides are congruent, but there's also the extra feature that all four angles are right angles. That doesn't have to be true in just any old rhombus. If we think back over here, these are not right angles in this particular shape. Now over here, a rhombus is a special parallelogram. So I'm going to drag rhombus over here. So a rhombus is a special parallelogram. So a rhombus has four sides that are congruent, okay? Two opposite sides that are parallel to one another. That's true in a parallelogram. The opposite sides are congruent, yes. The opposite sides in a rhombus are congruent, and it just so happens that they all have the same length. In a parallelogram, that's not true. So therefore, if a rhombus is a special parallelogram, a square also has to be a special parallelogram. And you know what else is a special parallelogram? A rectangle. And the reason for that is this. If we take a look here, we have two sides that are opposite each other that are congruent, two sides opposite each other that are congruent here. The catch for a rectangle is that all of the angles are 90 degrees. Up here in the parallelogram, these angles are not right angles. And finally, all of these shapes, a square, a rhombus, a rectangle, and a parallelogram, are all quadrilaterals. Now that's a lot of properties that we just dragged around, and this isn't the neatest of organizers. So we also have this organizer here. And we really did not talk about isosceles trapezoids. You're going to get into those in a later year, so we're just going to cross these out right now. We didn't talk about isosceles trapezoids, and we didn't talk about kites. We've talked about trapezoids, which only have two parallel lines and they're opposite each other. In a parallelogram, we have two pairs of opposite parallel sides. In a rectangle and square, we again have those two pair, and we also have 90-degree angles. In a rhombus, we have all four sides are congruent, same in a square. So today what you're going to be working on is a Google form to help you go through all of these different properties. Think very carefully. Again, you can have this video pulled up on another tab so that you can see this chart right here, or again, going back to the graphic organizer with the shapes and all the properties that we talked about before.